Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith, along with co-host Dave Anderson, episode 312. We have a special guest, a fellow teaching pro, originally from Russia, now living in the good old USA, working in Dallas, Egor Shestakov. Let me hear you pronounce his name, Davey baby.
Egor Shestakov.
Egor, let's have you give it a go. See if you do it as well as Anderson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Egor Shestakov.
Very good.
I'm from Kaliningrad, Russia. I've been in America over probably last 6 years. I'm very happy to be on the podcast, and I'm excited to talk tennis with you guys.
No, thank you very much. Tell us about your journey. Obviously, you're passionate. You're in the game as a livelihood. Tell us about growing up tennis in Russia.
Well, I was born in a sporting family. My dad is a tennis coach, and so he still teaches. He still teaches a good bit. My mother is a fitness coach. She's still working as a fitness coach. She does a lot of group lessons and Pilates and yoga and stuff like that. So I remember, my mom would drop me off by my dad's tennis court, and he would teach, and I would just watch him hit balls. And I think at some point I was quite excited about trying to do the same thing, and he started teaching me, and that's how I started playing the game. Probably around 7 or 8 when I started, just standard group lessons, like a group of 6, typical Russian. You have hardwood tennis court, it's multi-purpose, and it's one court, nothing fancy, but pretty good instruction. I had a video, I sent it to Coach Dave when I was maybe 10 or 11 with my backhand and forehand, and it wasn't too bad. And I feel like my dad did a great job of teaching me. So maybe around age 13, I transferred to the other coach because I don't think me and my dad could really get along. I don't think we kind of had a good long-term view of what to do with me. So we started arguing a good bit, I think because we were quite lost. And then I transferred to a different coach who was a tremendous character coach. And he supported me and pretty much allowed me to train for very, very little pay. And I just, hit with anybody and everybody. Just love the game, love to work hard, love to compete. And, I'm very happy to do it to this day.
Tell us a little bit about the size of the town, the city you grew up in.
So I'm from Kaliningrad, which is a former German town. It used to be called Königsberg before 1945 when Russia took over. We have 2 outdoor stadiums that were built by Germans. So it's red clay. It's great. It still stands to this day. But I think it's one of the smallest states in Russia, size-wise. And we have, the whole state has probably around 1 million people total. So it's very small, and it's in kind of sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania. So it's not directly connected to mainland Russia. So for me, the trip is 3 hours to Poland, but to go to Moscow on a train, it's 24 hours. So
wow,
I'm closer to Europe. Like, I played all of my junior tournaments in Lithuania, in Poland, in Latvia, and I've been to mainland Russia maybe 6 times total.
Did you play other sports? The Soviet system, I was always under the impression, the information that you had to learn, ideally 2 sports. Did you play other sports as well?
Yeah, I don't think it was super organized. I was a kid, so I would go out, play a lot of soccer, football, as we call there. And it was just street football with friends, and I'd say until the age of 14, I played more soccer than I played tennis, because every time I would go to my grandma's house or I would be at home, I would just go outside and I would kick a soccer ball with my friends all day long. I I also ran track for school, more like mid-distance running, but mainly soccer. Mainly soccer was my second sport. My mother would always like take me to her classes, so I would just take part in her yoga classes from like the beginning really, and like I feel I'm pretty flexible for a tennis player, and I like to lead the stretches at Brookhaven. I think because I have some kind of knowledge about it. But yeah, like it's not that I played a lot of organized sports, but looking back at it, I did a lot of unorganized sporting activity.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I've heard great things from Dave and from others about you as a coach. With hard winters, you're saying one or two indoor courts was just hardwood. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
So I probably played on like every kind of surface there is because I started, it was like in kind of a military institution. They had like multi-purpose ground for just athletics. So that's where we would like rent out a court. It was hardwood and then, different place, just one court. It would be just kind of concrete and just shiny, sleek paint on top. Like you could slide on it. The ball doesn't stop. It just hits through like lightning fast. So it's like when you play on that, it's kill or be killed. Most of the time, yeah, like until maybe I was 15, 16, we started having like true hard courts popping up around, but they were like 2 or 3 times more expensive to rent. So my coach, he stayed in like not so great tennis court, and I like had to take like an hour and a half bus to get to that place to practice for 2 hours and then go back. But it was like the cheapest available court, and my coach could get enough hours there. He could rent enough hours for his small program. So that's what I pretty much played until I came to America, where it's all hard court. But there was some incidents when I played on like artificial grass with sand. There was carpet. There was Terraflex, if you know, it's like a rubber kind of a surface. So pretty much like anything and everything, really.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let me ask about languages. Based on your geographical location, did you learn other languages besides just Russian?
Well, when I would travel to Poland, I would speak some words. And it's quite easy. Like not really easy, but you could understand sometimes the whole passage. A lot of Ukrainians do a really good job with understanding Polish, so I could somewhat communicate on that. German wise, my parents' generation learned German in school instead of English, but I think all the Germans left to Germany after the Berlin Wall and Soviet Union collapsed. So it's mainly Russian language and really nothing else. So some understanding of Polish, I would say.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's start at the beginning stages of your journey, but go ahead, Dave.
Well, Igor is a unique human being in my time with him. I think the world of him. And I'll just share with the listeners how I met Igor. I was coaching on a Saturday morning and sitting in the chair on my court doing a video analysis. And suddenly I noticed there's somebody on the court outside of the lesson I'm giving, and a parent, I think. Maybe a parent wasn't there, and it was Igor. And, he had a notepad and he was there to do some observation and do whatever, and just kind of popped his way in. And I could tell immediately he had a totally different approach than anybody that I had encountered in recent years about learning. And, we kind of hit it off. And, then shortly after that, Igor made the trip down to Waco when you came down, Steve, to do the clinic. And I think that's where you guys may have met for the first time. And I've just been incredibly impressed with pursuit of knowledge, the work ethic, and I think watching Igor compete this weekend, we had a great UTR series hosting at the club this weekend. And, Igor knocked off doesn't get to train a whole lot and works a lot, and still knocked off Mason Vaughn and made his way to the semifinals. And the weather was brutal, and he had to play an hour later, but ran out of steam. But I mean, your upbringing that you just described, I think, is why I have seen what I've seen from the outside in, and just that's really my thoughts on my relationship with Egor. I think that I always tell kids respect is earned, not given. And Egor, in the time I've known him, has really earned a lot of respect from not only me, but everybody around the club.
Egor, thanks, Dave. Let me ask, are your grandparents still living?
My whole family is in Russia. It's actually this end of May, because of all the war situation and my state being kind of in between European Union nations, I didn't go home until so I came to America in 2020, and the first time I got to see my family was in 26, recently this May, when I took my wife and my family-in-law, and we went down to Turkey for a 9-day vacation for all of them to meet my side of the family too. But before that, I haven't been back since. And my grandma came too. My granddad couldn't, just because of his health. But all of my family is still there.
Oh, yeah, the reason I ask is generational. I was in the former Soviet Union, USSR, in 87 to study sports, study tennis. And then I've been there many times since, just in Moscow. But it's interesting to ask, say, not your generation or your parents' generation, but your grandparents, what do they think now of the day-to-day life in Russia now versus what it was like during the time of the Soviet Union?
Well, things are changing and always changing, right? I think last couple of years have been pretty difficult for them and for Russia. 90s were tough. Soviet Union wasn't that great as well. I mean, my parents had to wait in line to buy milk, and there was deficit of goods. No, not my parents, but my grandparents. So when market economy kicked in the 90s, a lot of people who depended on the Soviet regime and were kind of living pretty decently, that didn't work for them. It was chaotic. And honestly, Russia is just very, in terms of overall structure of the country, it's quite corrupt, and most of the people are not so well off, except for very, very tiny minority of them. So it's no wonder to see a lot of Russian immigrants, going down to different countries. And look at the tennis. I mean, you have Zverev, you have Tsitsipas, you have Shapovalov, you have Papirin, all of those Russian last names, those Russian immigrants, there is a reason that people go to different places for better life. So I don't think that my parents really love Soviet Union. I don't think, they like it now, but it probably is a little bit better.
I think the listeners have heard me say how I got started in tennis. People ask me, Steve, what's your goal? I still say I'd like to play for the Montreal Canadiens. So I grew up, hockey was my passion, and say hockey was my drug. And I, based on circumstance, pursued tennis as a second drug, an alternative. But my oldest brother has a PhD in Russian studies, and he was studying Russian hockey. So I said, okay, I'll study tennis. And tennis was booming at the time. But let me ask you this question. Maybe the answer is going to be no, but have you ever seen the movie Moscow on the Hudson?
No, I haven't.
You really should watch that, listeners. It goes way back, but the late Robin Williams, he was in the Moscow circus, would travel with musicians, and he defected in New York. And, and there's a scene where he was in the grocery store and he saw, an aisle was just all paper towels and toilet paper and different types of soap. And then he walks around the corner and he sees all this fruit. But I remember not only in Russia, former Soviet Union, but being in stores behind what we call the Iron Curtain. I remember buying these apples that in the U.S. they would have been discarded. People would have used them maybe to bake an apple pie, and once I bought the few pieces of fruit in the store, there was no fruit left in the store. But it's captured really well in that movie Moscow on the Hudson. But no, certainly sounds like you were born to coach. How did you get to the States? Better yet, how did you get in touch with Dave? How did you know Dave at age 10 to send him a video?
Well,
I'll clear up the 10 thing. He's given me the video since we've known each other.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But he just was bored one night and sent me some videos of when he was a kid.
Oh, okay. And, but then how did you get to the U.S. for college tennis?
So there is a pretty good tennis tradition in my hometown. I think because Andrei Cherkasov used to train there, and Alexander Volkov is from there, and we have pretty good tennis tradition there. And some people were going off to colleges, and my dad knew them, and so maybe around 14 to 15, like couple of my dad's friends' kids went out there, and they say like, hey, like there is a possibility to go out and play. And before that, I literally played like one serious tournament. Like I once signed up to Lithuanian national championship because I kind of belonged to the Lithuanian club, and I got to the final with like 12 and under. And after that, I haven't played anything outside of my town, like no ranking point, no Russian tennis tour, no nothing. And when my dad's friend told me like, hey, like you gotta get the Tennis Europe, you gotta go to ITF and play out and kind of get on the lookout because if you're good enough, you may get an opportunity to go to the US. Around 15, that's when it started. I remember me and my dad, for the first time, we took a train down to St. Petersburg to play a Tennis Europe tournament. I went through the qualies and I won the first round, got my first point. And I remember my dad is telling me like, Igor, like, I don't think I can travel with you because of how much it costs. Like, we'll have to figure out another way. So they did a paper that allowed me to travel outside of the country by myself, and I would just take a bus and go to Lithuania, to Poland, to Latvia, Estonia, and I would just play those Tennis Europe and then ITF events. And when I was about 17, I started just messaging all the coaches. I wanted to be in the warm parts of the country, so I just looked down to like Texas, Florida, North Carolina, all the warm states. And, I just started talking to all the college coaches, see what were the options, and chose to end up in Tyler, Texas. And I was happy to play for UT Tyler for 4 years from 2020 to 2024.
Yeah. I spoke earlier. Tyler, Texas, my two boys are born in Tyler, Texas. Spent, basically 10 years there from 81 to 91. That's a nice city overall. I mean, what were your thoughts about being in Tyler?
Big tennis tradition. I came to university because I felt like I knew how other kids, some kids who were part of the national teams in their countries, and like they would train, like had an opportunity to have some flexible schooling here and there. And I didn't really have that. And I didn't have like a great training regimen. And I honestly didn't have all the information to know how to maybe apply myself well enough to get better. So I couldn't, get really good at getting better. And I just had like a, opportunity. I realized that, hey, like I'm in a warm climate, and in America, tennis courts are free. Like you can go out in a public court, and it's actually a good tennis court, and you can practice as much as you want. So like my eyes were big, and I was so excited to go, and I really just wanted to play and study and be in a different environment and just meet new people. So I was really excited. And to me, Tyler was a great community. It didn't have too many distractions from playing tennis and doing good at school. And, being on the team, it's a lot more fun. College tennis is probably the most fun I've had playing tennis, traveling together, winning together, losing together too, and sometimes figuring out like how can we improve our culture. Because there would be moments when team is not practicing good, and it's up to players to figure out how to bring that intensity up. So I was really happy with my 4 years in Tyler, and plus what happened is when we transitioned from Division 3 to Division 2, I was one of the first players to be scholarship, and it was like a totally new team, and so like being part of kind of like the first people who put that team on a national map and winning the conference and conference championships and like having some rings and playing in a national championship and kind of establishing that tradition of having good culture and having a great program. It's worth more than just already coming to a well established powerhouse. So I was really happy to be one of those people who helped bring UT Tyler to what it is now in Division 2 tennis.
UT Tyler, University of Texas at Tyler, used to be called East Texas State. And when I first went to Tyler, there was no tennis program. And the Summers tennis facility, I spent a lot of time with Dick and Betty Summers. Betty Summers is an amazing story. She started playing tennis. I think she started playing on her 30th birthday. I think her husband bought her a racket and got a series of lessons. And the story was that someone walked by, a very good player. They're both connected to local politics. And this gentleman said to her, I think his name was Bob Lutz. And there's the famous tennis player, Bob Lutz. But anyway, his name was close to that. So I should have written all this down years gone by. But he said, Betty Summers, this game's too tough. You can't start at 30. And she was top 10 in the nation in the 35s. Amazing. She just had the mind for it. But really great people. They built, but it started off as an NAIA school. And I remember the former Yugoslavia, they had a female player. She married a Swede. I was in Sweden with my kids and ran into them. Again, that's one beautiful thing about the internet is I could research all that, but that name escapes me as well. But
Amila Fedhagic?
No, I mean, I wouldn't be able to even confirm it, but from Yugoslavia, moved really a great athlete, moved well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a little before your time, and you came in '85 to Texas, right, Dane?
Yeah.
So they were NAIA. How did that work? So when you started, they were Division 3?
No, once you move from Division 3 to Division 2, I think there is like a 2-year period. And I was, they went Division 2 for the first year, kind of called transition period. And the second year is when I came and some other, better level players who were scholarships. So we started having a scholarship budget and, we started competing on Division 2 level.
So many things. Dick and Betty Summers, I could share so many stories, but yeah, I hit a ton of balls with them. They ended up having their own indoor court on the country. I had a key to that. And they knew I was working late hours, but there was, it was almost like on a regular basis at one point where they would come pick me up. And I know they changed the name of the high school, but it was Robbie Lee. And the track was open, and I'd find myself down there most nights. We would just go down and jog a mile and then run a mile for time. But that was one of the reasons that she was so good, is that you got to be able to move and play this game. And you got to be, so you got to run. Go ahead, Dave.
Post-college, in fact, when we met, I was already recruiting you on day one, but I know that there were some decisions that you had to make in regard to what you were looking to do. And just tell us a little bit about that and kind of what weighed into your decision to lean into the tennis field.
Well, I feel like, I studied economics in school and had minor in mathematics. And I just got into it. Plus, with just a job market for somebody who may have, at that time, I wasn't married to my wife, and I was not even like remotely close to having like a, proper situation to get into, some other more well-established industries. But I've always been coaching, and I've always been interested in coaching. And even in college, I started studying information on tennis intelligence applied, and I've been listening to UNC for like a long time, thanks to my wife, because I didn't have a proper iPhone. So when I bought my first iPhone, I I just had Apple Podcasts on, so I decided to start listening to something about tennis, and I came across your podcast, Steve, and I ended up being in Tyler, and you were in Tyler, and just listening to all of those stories and kind of understanding, and just on the car rides, I've been just immersed myself into the information as much as I could. So I felt like I had a leg up in that, so I decided to lean in. But see how life will work out in the future. But for now, I've been just trying to get better at teaching tennis.
Igor, what about your wife? Does she play tennis? Is she an athlete?
She's a former athlete. She spent most of her time in Texas, and she was coached by one of your students, Mark Watt, and she had to quit because of her wrist injury, and it was quite unfortunate. But I mean, she still played. We played mixed doubles together at a fundraiser in Tyler for Tyler, UT Tyler and TJC. So she still hits the balls every once in a while. She has really great backhand, incredible backhand, and we play sometimes. But now she's studying to be an early childhood educator, and just passed her first part of the teacher certification, so she's working hard. But yeah, she's definitely an athlete.
No, that certainly helps. I think certainly for a spouse to understand coaching tennis, you're working weekends, you're working evenings. Tennis comes through the phone, through the mail, through the TV. In a lot of ways, there's no turning it off. And people that are really passionate, they don't want to turn it off. Oh, your story is very intriguing. Your story is very intriguing. Mark Voss, he's from Minnesota, correct, Dave?
Yeah, and small town.
He was with us for 2 years, and then he connected with Dennis Vandermeer through us, and names. The South African gal who did so well. He was working as a sparring partner with her, Amanda Kutzer.
Yeah.
But then he joined us at the crazy Seguzo Bassett, so that was another year. To digress, one quick story about Mark Voss. So you're doing an internship with Harry Hopman. Mr. Hopman had passed away at that time, but he hired students from Tyler Junior College's tennis tech program. So Howard Moore ran the program, asked Mark to string 5 rackets. And then Howard swung by on his golf cart, and Mark was playing doubles, and it was just a little over an hour had gone by. And he said, "Hey, I told you have to string those rackets, then you could play." And he goes, "Yeah, I've already strung the rackets." And Howard said, "You're lying to me, mate. There's no way." And he goes in the pro shop, and he just comes out going, "How did you do that?" But anyway, that's a Mark Voss story for you. And what did you do in your summers with the time you're at UTT? What did you do your summers from a tennis standpoint?
Well, first summer I went out to work at a boys camp in New Hampshire. I was kind of like a glorified babysitter, tennis counselor, and after that I helped out Mark Watson in his place, and that's where I met my wife too, because she was running the kind of Orange Bowl program, little kids development, and she told me what I need to do, and I did. But after the class, she told me I was a little bit too intense on the kids, so I had to adjust a little bit.
No, that's one great thing about Russian tennis. You go to a Russian facility, and one court is all athletic equipment. It looks like a gymnastics center, and they're They're ahead of us. I mean, in the U.S., a lot of positives, but tennis has become too much of a business. But I think in other parts of the world, tennis is still a sport. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, you're in a stage of life I remember well, and you're still just very passionate about playing, and and you have a great characteristic in that. Despite your passion for playing, I feel you always put your students' games first. And why don't you tell us a little bit about that and your balance that you're able to achieve with that? Because you have a lot of balls in the air for a young man. I feel like despite that, you have a great balance in your life. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you're able to achieve that?
I think it's really important, and we all get distracted, but to really try to be present to as much as you can. And I think the world feeds in a lot of distractions nowadays, and they are programmed in such a way to kind of hijack your attention and control you. So really just trying to stay away from that and knowing where my priorities are. And I always have to devote time to my wife and also devote time to myself and my physical health, trying to spend time in the gym and keeping my health so that I can play when I would like to play. Because if I'm not putting in the physical work and I'm not prepared physically, injuries will come. And also, taking care of my schoolwork as well and just planning my week ahead, knowing what needs to be done and what task needs to be prioritized. And honestly, also just very important to recover well. And, people say that there are things that can relax you, but there are also things that can recharge you. And, like some people can go out, drink 6 beers, but yeah, they may get relaxed, but they may not feel recharged for the next day. So I'm just trying to make sure that when I'm resting, I'm resting well, and I'm, kind of restoring my body and mind to attack the next day and do the best I can.
Oh, that's great. I remember the late Jim Lair saying that if you could just keep playing a set a day. I remember me and a gentleman who's forever, Mike Mahoney, works with Tennis Corporation of America, Midtown Tennis, and he used to, indoors, of course, but he was playing a set a day. Because once you stop, it's very difficult to get back into the routine. And with, let me ask you this: with injuries, I know when we spoke on the phone earlier, you mentioned you wanted to touch upon injuries. Could you do that?
Yeah. So I think my sophomore year, I was training, and I was a little bit dumb about my setup. Like I used to play with Wilson Pro staff with Hyper G, full poly, and like strung it at 24 kilos, like 55 pounds, with just a lot of stiffness. And I tend to like to accelerate the ball and go for it and train with intensity. So I think it was just some level of overuse, and I just hit one backhand and it popped, and it was ECU tendon. Coach Dave had to deal with that, but he had a little bit better treatment to it because he started taking care of it right away. But for me, it was kind of in between schools, so I couldn't really get checked up. And once I got back to Tyler, I tried all sorts of rehab and tried to get cortisone injections and everything really, but it didn't work. So for like about a year and a half, really, I just didn't have a backhand. I had to slice the ball, and slice can come in and run around. And it was really difficult mentally because I think backhand is kind of my more stable and consistent shot, and I can rely on that, especially on the return of serve. But, I couldn't do it. So I had to, deal with that, first of all, mentally, kind of accepting what it is what it is, and how can I make the best out of it. And also it helped me to start addressing some other parts of my game. I couldn't hang in the rallies too long, so just slice approach and go to the net. And even without, at that time knowing the system and knowing the system for the volley and stuff like that, just through reps and just desire to come in as much as possible, I became a better volleyer than I was. And my movements gotten better because I had to run around the forehand whenever I had the opportunity. So plus, it's just difficult to manage, but after the surgery, it started getting better. And but first, there was projected date to play by January 1st, and I didn't hit that date. So I was also had to like kind of accept that it may take longer, and I was taking ibuprofen, and the guys on the team helped me out with that mentally because I really wanted to contribute, and once I kind of started going through like ibuprofen and feeling more or less decent, and just started playing, and I remember my first match back, I clinched against a school in Arkansas, and I was really happy, but that route, that path for like year and a half, not being able to hit your best shot, I think in the end made me stronger mentally, and also it made me a better player all around.
And Igor, are you one-hander or two-hander on the backhand side?
I'm a two-hander.
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
So I still could practice, and I could still practice and like compete and run and fight, but I just couldn't hit a backhand two-handedly.
I see. David, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, how you come out of that, that's not an easy one, right? Sideline Delpo, Muhova, many players, tennis players don't like the risk. You're still at a young stage of life, but you're wise beyond your years. And what advice would you have for parents and young players? Because as you know, Igor, every day we struggle to get kids to do the right things, right? In regard to pre and post, and really not valuing the physical aspect. That what advice do you have to parents and players, and really, I guess, coaches? But I feel like many times we're talking to a wall to try to get them to do the right things over and over.
Are you talking about like dealing with injuries and how like?
Yeah, well, really, really more prehab. Doing the right thing so you minimize the chances.
I mean, I just can't stop stressing it enough whenever we start our 7 o'clock practice in the morning that, hey guys, like bring your rubber band, do your arm care stuff, do your hip care stuff. Because the thing is that when they are 12, 13, they can't produce as much force. They don't have that like strong nervous system and just force generating capacity. So they can get away without not warming up properly, because they can be, really accelerate as much, and they can't put as much strain on the body. But as they hit puberty and, the speeds ramp up and the intensity gets up, but they have not developed the habits of proper taking care of the body, then you start getting injured. Weight room is so important nowadays. I mean, it's just the way it is. You look at sprinters, you look at track and field, and they measure everything. Like you gotta measure your squat, you gotta measure your power clean, you gotta see how you jump. But our tennis culture is not there yet. I think it may, because such a skill-based sport. You can be a not so great athlete, but have incredible racket skills and still be great. But definitely, I mean, just overall physical preparations. You do that preparation that might be mundane and boring, but that's what gets you to stay in the game long term, and that's what gets you to be able to show up with work, and intensity, and be able to work through long hours and get those reps and over time accumulate them enough that you can really, move that needle.
Oh, thanks, Igor. Let me have you touch upon one of the things that you sent to me as a list. College tennis, being at a non-brand name school. Could you touch upon that?
Absolutely. I think people are missing out so much. I don't understand how come. I understand the perspective of a foreigner, because, like, let's be honest, if some guy from Estonia comes in and he's playing at like no name, like Idaho State Potato University, but when they come home and they have a diploma, from American university, the employer sees them as an academic god, like a person who, because the reputation of American education abroad is supreme. And they see people who manage to go through American education, they see that they have to do that in their language that's not their own. So it already kind of shows the quality. But for Americans, there is so much like, it's a brand name, and, everybody wants to go out and play at TCU, UT, and Baylor and whatnot. But there is a lot more value in being able to just play and compete and go through difficult moments with your team and create the culture. And because during those 4 years, if you are the one that building the culture, your character changes for the better, and you become a better person. And water is not gonna it's gonna prepare you for the life in the future. But if you are a 10 UTR and you can't play in Texas, and you just decide to give up and don't look further than top brand name schools and decide to just go for academics, you're missing out because you're not gonna experience the struggles and the joys and the discipline and all of those things related to college sports. And I think, those things forward down the road will pay off. It's way more than just, where you ended up playing. There are many people who are not so great at tennis ended up being on the team and found a way to contribute and found a way to help the growth of their university and their team. And that prepares them for life better than just any brand name school. If you just go out and go to like a regular student, go to class, and there's just way more to that than just the name.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I've said that for years. D1. I want to go to D1 school. I think it's great. The player who just won the Wimbledon doubles title second time played at UNC Asheville. Now, your coach from UTT, he just took the job at UNC. Help me out, UNC.
Wilmington,
yeah.
I was just on the phone the other day with Raleigh Grossbaum, he's from Idaho, and he's a coach at the University of Idaho. I mean, today we were making a tape for Jose Garcia, who's at the University of Tennessee. I mean, he's a Tennessee kid. Their team wasn't so strong last year, but nevertheless, a Tennessee kid playing number one in Tennessee is a great achievement. But college tennis ends, now people have an extra year, which is good. But if people want to play beyond the age of 22, 23, and find a way to do that, right? I think of Stan Smith's doubles partner from years ago, Eric Van Dillen. He would play not the entire year, but you'd go to school for one semester, and then he'd play the rest of the year. You can really think outside the box. I know a lot of kids. Braden used to always say, you want to go where you're wanted. And you need to get playing time. Being an ice hockey fan, and my brother, who had a career in the NHL as a scout, a coach, a manager, they used to have the term, still do, down on the farm team, is you can really grow. You can really grow. But I think the American wants to go to the name school, I could just tell story after story. And I've been in it so long, people could only guess who I'm referring to. So without mentioning names, one of our students was given a offer at the University of Florida, but she would have had to sit out a year. And I said, oh, that's great. Take that. And we'll set you up in Europe for a year to train. And she didn't take that. She went to a school where one of our other students was playing, and the student told her, I wouldn't really go here. We're having some problems. And sure enough, when she went to that school, the coach who recruited her wasn't there, and their program was really, really down and out. But yeah, and college tennis is 32 weeks a year. What do you do in the summertime? It's really interesting how you look at, like, say, American football. And there's so many kids that are from small programs, colleges that you may not even heard of. Obviously, insiders in football have heard of them because they are football cultures. But yeah, there should be no awe factor if you're playing at a small school, and then you get to play against. So someone from UT Tyler, a brand school, someone from UT Austin, it's like, no, you can compete. You might not be able to do it right out of the blocks as an 18-year-old, but 4 or 5 years later in college tennis, it just comes down to having the passion you're talking about, where, public courts and just putting in the extra hours, just working. But go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, along those lines, I think that one of the best programs the USTA has created is also, in a way, a difficult thing for many people right now, because college tennis on campus, it does allow some players to go and be a part of that, college tennis on campus program. And it's been a great vehicle for many. But I think prior to that, the start of that, many of the kids that now are choosing brand name schools and just say they're not quite at the team level, so they'll go do the tennis on campus. They used to go and play at D2, D3. There was just that's a major shift I've noticed. And I mean, we've got a couple of kids that attended SMU and played tennis, college tennis on campus there, and they're really good players. But the allure of just kind of being at that big school is really strong. And I think UT Tyler has a great program, Igor. It's a tremendous program that, like you said, you've helped put on the map. But kids are overlooking schools like Trinity and many of these schools here in Texas, thinking that it's a step down, and if they often end up at schools where they don't see any matches through the 4 years, and suddenly they're graduated and the rackets get set down. And I think that's it breaks my heart to see it, because I think there's too much time, effort, and the sport, is truly for a lifetime. So
Trinity, let me just digress. Trinity, not too long ago, I've been there a few times over the last couple of years. I was in San Antonio, and I asked my host if he could swing me by. Let's see the Trinity campus. Unbelievable. And actually, the AD, his son is back playing tennis, but when he was really young, he was brought to work with me for a week. There's such a great tradition. They had, under Clarence Mabry, they were D1. They had legends like Dick Stockton and Brian Godfrey, Bobby McKinley, Chuck McKinley. I mean, talking about Chuck McKinley, somebody won Wimbledon. But coming back to just today, so we get up 5:45, we put 4 hours on the court, beat the heat, okay, then it's a refresh and take a nap. And so then we get back in the classroom at 3:30. And so I came in the classroom, and the student assistant had Austin Krychek was on TV playing doubles. And so then we put in this match for this young guy, Jose Garcia, that was just sent to me and by his older brother, one of his older brothers. And he was playing somebody who's played at Mississippi State, who we also coached, spent a lot of time with. And so then after that, we put in a tape of two 12-year-olds. And, we're making these 10-minute segments of this 2-hour match of a player from the University of Tennessee who I've known since he was 8. And so we have two 12-year-olds that are playing. And then I told the group, I said, these two 12-year-olds are playing better. I said, there's more net appearances. They're staying in the pocket. They're coming in. So that's confusing as well. The famous book by McPhee, what's his first name? Having a tough time with names today. Levels of the Game. But yeah, blossom where you're planted, and it's a great opportunity to go. I've coached so many boys, especially, that have gone to universities, and they went to a place that was over their head. They went to a place where they didn't play matches, and there's no substitute for playing matches. But coming back to, someone like Raleigh Grossbaum is a highly motivated coach, and say, I want to try to go somewhere where the coach will connect with my junior background. I would say for the most part, college coaches don't connect with the junior coach. But that's an interesting topic. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, no, I mean, to follow up on your last comment there, it seldom has the continuity. It seems like once the paper is signed, it's kind of shut down. Even here, it's happened multiple times. And it happens, and I think it's a shame that disconnect happens then, because I think it would allow people to continue growing. I mean, there's a lot of insight you gain about a player from their junior years and how to coach them, as well as how they've been coached. And I think it can help make a college coach's job easier, but seldom do I see that, link between the two.
The expression, to go back to the well, with what got you to the University of Tennessee. With money is always a factor too, though. Is that it's really interesting what people can do in the summer, and even years ago, many college tennis players worked the college camp, but they still put in long days, and after they would help run the camp, they're out there playing set after set. It seems to me that most college tennis players would be better off really working on their game. I know Simon Earnshaw at North Carolina State, he has it college by college, is how many people came out of this college and how much money did they make. So there's a lot of hype that college tennis, it can be a stepping stone to the pros, but it's what you do when you're there. And you can play in the C League, and then you move to the B League, and you can work your way up. But in every situation, like Roger Federer said, it's very important to have the right coach at the right time, be in the right place at the right time. And what's your match count? And so many players, they're trying to jump up. I remember, Jimmy Connors saying, play where the pressure is, play your own age group. And if you're dominating, still play your own age group. But people are chasing points, and they're just not playing enough backyard tennis. I know that's a topic that you like to crack people over the head with, Dave, because they really need it. It's like my thought on that ITF, idiots traveling foolishly, is play anywhere and everywhere.
We had a great event, Steve, here this weekend, to give them a group of people that are trying to kind of create a version of the Battle of Boca here in Dallas. And two brothers, dad is a lifelong coach, and they both the brothers played at LSU, very good players, and from Mexico, and they're putting on these hotel planners and these UTR shootouts every weekend. And so we are going to host many of them in the future, but we hosted one this weekend, and the quarterfinals on, it was basically like Kalamazoo, and kids are in their backyard and they're competing. And I bet if we played that tournament 10 weeks in a row, it would have similar quarterfinals, but I bet there'd be, 7, 8 different winners each week, and each of those 10 weeks. And that, the funny part is, as Egor can verify, we have that option almost weekly here, but yet people choose to invest $2,000-$3,000 in travel and do it. But you say it all the time, it's increasing match count. And there's a big difference between increasing match count, quality match count, learning, versus trying to increase points. And I think these UTRs like this, I'm a big backer of them, because these kids can boost up their UTR. And there's not a college coach in the world who is, you might not have the experience at the L1 level nationally, but if your UTR is, continually rising from playing these quality events over the course of years, I mean, you're going to get recruited well.
That's well put. Egor, what you put down on the list, you'd like to touch upon sports psychology, the emotional side of tennis. Why don't you touch upon that?
Yeah, so I think what happened is in Tyler, the coach that just started out, so UNC Wilmington, when he came, he was, they provided us with tools, right? One of them was AT. I think, at that time it was an amazing tool, but I think just anything, like people say how mental tennis is, and honestly, when I hear juniors say, "Oh, it's all mental," and like I can't play good in pressure points, it's all mental. It's kind of like a cop out, because like you just have to work on that stuff. And to me, it was 10, 20 minutes a day, every day. I had a streak. and I would just, visualize, and there was like guided visualizations. And from gym later on, I started journaling as well. But it, to me, like, this is a skill as much as it is forehand and backhand is a skill. Having proper and good emotional regulation, it can be learned. And even like I was a hothead, like to all the like juniors at the academy who like get in trouble, I would get in trouble twice as more. Like I would literally cuss out throughout. Like people on court 1 could hear me sometimes, and I was on court 12. So like I was not very well emotionally regulated. And of course, when I started traveling by myself, and I would get code violations, and I can't kind of I had to get myself together. But I mean, still, it was not an easy thing for me to do. But it is a skill, and through like setting aside 10 to 20 minutes a day and just visualizing yourself getting through the tough moments that tend to trigger you. Like some of our students, like I was with him at Easter Bowl, and he gets triggered pretty badly when he sees that it might not be the right line call, and after that he may check out for 3 to 4 points. And kind of getting ready for adversity and visualizing for adversity is incredible. It's incredibly helpful because you put yourself in the position when that happens, you're already prepared. You put the work in. It's not a it's not a you not react. You respond, and that's really powerful because controversy and adversity will come in any match, any tournament. There's gonna be something, and I mean, if you're prepared, you're prepared. But if I always hear, "Oh, he hooked me," or "the ref didn't do a good job," here and there, it is just a cop out. Like this sport is really difficult mentally, but very very few people tend to train that, and I think they're missing gains on the table, and they can definitely improve a lot if they really commit to it.
No, thanks for your input on being a hothead. There's a fine line with that. Obviously, individual by individual case study. Yeah, but you don't want to break someone's spirit. You don't want to have them be so controlled that, I mean, to me, I've said it many times, with some players, you would just love to see him turn, throw the racket, and swear. It's like, would you rather tame the tiger or fire up the pussycat? So you don't want to break someone's spirit by, that's where other sports, the code violations are there, but, the penalties, but even like, say, the grassroots level where, kids regulate kids. To me, for me, I growing up in an outdoor rink and you're a younger kid and you're playing with the older kids, you're going to get the elbow, you're going to get you're going to get the stick. I mean, but with that, toughens you up, the playground mentality. But if you're always around coaches, the parents are always there. I think we could turn to that on the psychology. With the Russians, Vic Braden used to say, if you ask an American kid to practice 3 hours, they'll practice 2. You ask a Russian kid to practice 3, they'll practice 4. I've always found Russians, rich or poor, and they're definitely the haves and have-nots now. Where do you think that comes from? Why is the rich Russian, for the most part, not the categorized, but they're hungrier than the rich American?
I think we don't see that opportunity. Like when when Russians come to the States, they see the opportunity. But even, when you're inside Russia, you sometimes realize that for a lot of people, sport, especially in Soviet Union, sport was a way to live way more comfortably. You could have gone work 10-hour shifts in the factory, but you could have also, been a great athlete and be on a state, be state sponsored and get an apartment. So Soviet Union put a lot of effort into athletics, but I think it's just the way you're raised, and I think hard work is really really emphasized. It was really emphasized in my household, and through my dad. And people are different because, like, for me right now, my brother is 14, and it's a little bit different situation for him. We're different people, But, there is still like, of course there is that reputation of tough Russians. But I'm going to tell you, like on my college team, I had to deal with some people from post-Soviet Union that came out of that region, and they were not tough and they were not organized. And I think it's case by case, and I'm glad we have that reputation, but it really does depend. So I really can't give a definitive answer. For me, I just knew that like I had no other choice but to work hard, because if I wanted to get to the States, if I wanted to go to school, I mean, I know I'm not like the fastest player and I'm not the most athletic, and I definitely hasn't don't have as much didn't have as much opportunity to practice as some other kids who are doing full time tennis. So I just had to maximize every hour possible and, do some work on the side, just run and go outside and do some pull ups to get stronger. But I just sometimes, the choice is an illusion, and you just have to do what you have to do.
I'll tell you a story. I was with my son Connor. Actually, we were staying with Dave in Dallas, and the tournament was a challenger at Brookhaven. And, I knew most of the players, and young Rublev was there. What's Rublev's first name?
Andrei.
Yeah. So, I mean, he was going up to everyone when there was an open court. He was out. I don't know if he even got through the qualies. He might have been 17. As I said, 18, young guy. And, some of the older pros, they weren't too old, 22, 23, and they're going, oh, he's going to burn out. I remember just telling him, I said, no, I said, he's the most impressive person here. He didn't know what he was doing, but he was just in the gym pumping iron. And as soon as the court was open, he went around the entire players' lounge, pretty much begging people to hit. One thing of the Russian mentality, I think this is true, is the harder you work physically, the tougher you'll be mentally. What do you think of that comment?
I think it's true. I mean, in any sport, that's what brings you confidence. I think like every time I would go through an off-season training and I would have a plan, and I would have to go out and run 400, and first week you run 8, then 10, then 15, and then maybe you drop down to before you head out. But it's just such a mundane thing, and you just build that ability to tolerate and endure that stuff. Or going in the weight room and having to do heavy squats, that stuff just prepares you for difficulty, because you just have to do it. And I think once you build that confidence, and then you see and you look back and you see that you have put in that hard work, then you start believing in yourself more. Because I don't know if some people just have that innate belief that they can do it. To me, I need to put in work to kind of understand that I can get there. Like, I don't think anybody wakes up and just realizes that they can become great. Like, to me, you have to put in work day after day, and develop those qualities. And physical work is sometimes can be really mundane and difficult. And when you run your 10th 400 and you're suffering, that's when you feel like I can do it, and that prepares you for anything. So to me, without physical hardship, without that, it's impossible. It's impossible to be mentally tough.
With running, having been in Moscow many times, you could just drop your child off at a track, and this is a running program, and the coach running it, they pretty much know all about the kid after they just run one lap. It's just amazing. I'm always telling American kids, like today, we had a hiccup and we were going to run the beep tests, and the player here who has the best time, I was going to have him run backwards. Not to hurt anybody's feelings, but okay, this guy will run, he'll go further backwards and you go forwards. And so many American kids, they're not around athletes. In other countries, they're called track and field athletics. But yeah, that's the American kid will show up at a tennis program. They don't have running shoes, and they don't run it unless they're told to. But that's a European mentality with knowing someone's mile time. With go ahead, Dave.
Well, yeah, I think Igor, you said something very key in there. That plenty of soft Russians too, and I've had a couple that worked here, and I think that we're here on this podcast talking about a culture that has softness lined with, it's lined with softness. And, your upbringing, the struggle, the suffering you've had to endure to get where you are, I think that it's one of the challenges we have as coaches is how do we create that similar struggle in a sport and in a culture of a sport that, doesn't like struggle. It doesn't, it's not a natural part of it, especially at a level as people are climbing up, because at some point they're going to have to struggle. And, I think that, when you talked about the mental side, I got to watch you play a lot of tennis this weekend. What would you say is the biggest area mentally, emotionally that you're trying to maybe acquire, the biggest skill set? Because I totally believe, like you just mentioned it, it's just a skill. There's no such thing. I told somebody at the tournament this weekend, I said, you're not mentally weak. I said, you're just not disciplined enough to practice the skills you need in order to obtain that. And, whether it's linking everything together, the technique, tactics, whatever, the physical, or devoting time to a mental. But I'm curious what you think about your own game and being a competitor. What would you say the biggest mental area you have to improve upon?
I think commitment to the tools I have developed, and just trusting that, I've been working on my serve a lot, and just making sure that I'm relaxed and I trust it. And, I can allow myself to just let my body work through it. And, the challenge is that I'm not training full time. So that, getting those proper reps and, having that confidence that my serve is going to be there. It's not easy when you're not putting in as many hours, but I think still, like, just telling yourself that, you have to do it the right way, and you have to play the game the way you were taught, and play the way that, hit every shot like God intended to. And when you play that way and you lose, you can lose, and it's gonna happen. But I would rather lose on my own terms and, walk away knowing that I did everything I can and I just didn't execute, rather than, kind of second guessing myself and, not committing to the right strategy and not committing to the way that I need to be playing against that particular opponent.
Yeah, so many things. When we opened it up and Dave talked about you and your character, and just goes back to making a guess on how you were parented from the beginning. There's an interview that's not so old with John Wertheim, who's on the Erotic podcast. He was not on the podcast, but he was interviewing Novak, and he said, well, you were born with these mental skills. And Novak immediately interrupted him. He said, no, I wasn't. He said he had to work over a long period of time. Coming back to the movie, The Moscow on the Hudson, being in Tyler, Texas, we had students come. I just think of the experience. Okay, this Polish kid, this Czech kid, and I would pick them up driving 90 miles into the Dallas airport, and knew there would be a struggle with the language, and I would take them before I got to Tyler. I would be at the airport and stop at the Galleria Mall, and this really amazing mall, 2 or 3 levels, and there's an ice skating rink in the middle of it. And I used to do that just to see the expression on their faces. And I remember some people that they came in and they were so hungry, but a term my mother used to use all the time, my late mother, is that they became Americanized. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to go soft in the good old USA. Let me ask a question. The Russians, certainly with a corrupt government, you get yourself in trouble, but a kid from Japan versus a kid from Russia, they're playing a junior tournament. And, in Japan, they have vending machines, like if it's made in glass and in the vending machine, you can actually buy a bottle of booze. Or better example, and nobody's breaking the vending machine. Or if you left your briefcase on the street corner, you come back, we tease and say a week later, it's still going to be there. But the corruption of the Russian government, whether that's currently or years gone by, I know a coach from Sochi that should be able to rattle off her last name. This is a podcast with not being accurate with names. Tatiana, it's a famous Russian coach, but the kids used to, if they was 6'1", they won 6'1", they had to run 1 mile, 6'2", 2 miles. So a kid wins a 7-6. They go to a tiebreaker. They win this set, but they have to run 6 miles. That promotes cheating. Another thing, obviously, number one is over-the-top parents. But academies will promote cheating by, they call it instruction, but you drill in the morning. There's very little instruction for the most part, academy to academy. You drill in the morning, and in the afternoon you play matches. And if you win in the afternoon, then you move up in a group. What are your thoughts on cheating? What was that like in junior tennis for you? And just overall, how would you talk to parents and players, coaches about that?
To me, I think it wasn't really bad. I think it's here in the US because you always play on hard courts. The tournaments are on hard courts. It's tougher. On clay, you can just show the bounce and ask the ref, and kind of you can mediate that. But I mean, Japan, yeah, definitely high class society. I had a teammate from Japan, and he would do things the way you're supposed to do, and he would not look for loopholes. I think that to all the parents who deal with that 12 and under controversy and cheating and stuff like that, let the racket do the talking. They may lose today, and I understand, you empathize with your kids so much, and you drove down 5 hours down the road to play the event. But at the end of the day, it's a match. And honestly, sometimes cheating can be good for your kids to overcome too. I think you can build up confidence. You play somebody who hooks and you don't succumb to pressure. You don't get upset. You don't show it. You just move on. And next point, how well do you respond? I think that can build up pretty good character, just the way you handle those things. Because life is unfair, even outside of tennis. So if that's the case, then use tennis as a vehicle to prepare yourself for that. And I think if you look at it this way, then you may want to be starting, to look for the matches against people that cheat and things like that. So it's just how you frame that and how do you talk to your kid about that. I think that's what matters more.
No, thanks for that input. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, it's interesting, Egor. If we had to stop right here and I'm hearing a constant reminder in all of your messages to people about controlling your controllable issues, whether it's your physicality that you're building, whether it's, and I when I think of you, that's really what I think of. Yesterday, for our listeners, Egor, it was probably, 120 degrees on court, and he had a complete war in a match, a 3-set war that he came out on top of, and had an hour and a half, and had to come back on. And at the end of that second match, he could barely walk. And Dave Ware, who's director of racket sports here, said to Egor, "Hey, there's a person that just called in, and they wanted a lesson at 5." And but it's interesting, Egor, because I could see in your eyes, if that were real, he was joking, but if it were real, he even made the comment, he got the sense you would have done it. And that hunger, what advice, because that hunger is critical, and what advice do you have for parents now that you're immersed in the junior tennis culture on how to help build the hunger in their players?
I think a lot of times is too much opportunity is too much. I feel like when you have like the best course and you have private lesson every day and you have a fitness coach and sometimes the kid needs to learn through trial and effort, kind of like Andrei Rublev. Like I don't think he was brought up with a professional lifting coach. He just went out and pumped tire and that's how I started too. And then eventually you may learn and you may start googling up how to structure your training and program and stuff like that. I think that you gotta allow them to search and kind of guide that self discovery. So you don't need to train them like a little professional. I think too many lessons sometimes get wasted. I think one lesson is enough, but you gotta back it up with 3 hours of independent work. 1 to 3 ratio, I think it's good, just like a calculus class in college. I think that, you know, let them spend time with some athletes outside of things, right? Hey, let's go hang out with track guys. I once went out to the weight room with throwers and Nicky Tyler. And when I saw a guy squatting 600 pounds, I was like, I have a long way to go. So things like that, get exposed to the sports outside of things. See how the culture in American football or in wrestling, it may help you. It may help you in tennis. I mean, team building as well. Play soccer. Learn how to deal with other people. Some people you're just not gonna like them, but I think just get exposed to things like that. And you know, I think a lot of times it's wasted on you know just providing them with the absolute best possible opportunity. And in an eye of a parent, that's what a parent I guess should be doing. But a kid does not understand that right now. So they need to let that needs to come from within and through exposure to maybe something else, something different outside of tennis. I think they can learn through osmosis what people do in some other cultures that can help them in tennis.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Going back to your father, in other countries, it seems that there's less marketing. In other words, America's the biggest economy in the world. The way I teach tennis is better than the way you teach tennis. Certainly, this has been going on for years and years, but this goes back to a USTA coach who she's now retired, but I know exactly the two players that she told this to, and I know where they are, and this had a big impact. They're not at the level they could have been at, but she said, well, you don't want to do the GreatBase. What you want to do is a blend of methods. And, it's just so ironic because the GreatBase is just that. It's a blend of methods. It's not one method. There's obviously a big emphasis on the science, the math from Braden, but, the application, like a Ryan Reedy with 2-Minute Tennis for listeners, I would check it out. Jeff Lewis with Jeff Lewis Tennis. Certainly they do a great job honoring Vic, but the two of them were trained in a system that, through myself directly, I worked with both of them when they were very, very young. But Ryan Reedy worked mostly for years, like with Jim Klein. But the two of them, because it was indirect, they weren't directly taught by these mentors or pillars that we have. But coming back to your dad, don't you think that when you were a kid, the coaches were more united, that basics were basics, and you went from one coach to the next, and there was more similarities and differences? There was, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
There was less marketing.
There was just not much BS. I'm gonna tell you, like it was a small group where I trained, but I haven't seen kids with extreme grips. I that was not the case. Even kids from other, like when I was 13 and up, I went to a different coach. We didn't have any kind of clicky stuff. It was just simple, like turn with the racket up high, make a circle. My dad, unfortunately, this is not the system for the volley that you guys teach and I teach. But I mean, at the end of the day, I started in a center ready position on a grip on 3, and I would turn with the racket up high and finish over the shoulder. And on the backhand, I would start from a ready position, turn, grip change, make a circle. That was it, finish over the shoulder. On the serve, my dad told me, hey, soft, low, and into the court. I mean, it wasn't detailed, and it was like I didn't optimize every single bit on my serve and on my forehand and back and volley. But I think the simplicity and the fundamentals were there. Like I hit the ball the way that, I wouldn't say like incredibly efficient, but it's in the fundamental range of correctness. So that I think all the coaches in my hometown, there was no YouTube, so people seem to teach the simple and the basic stuff. Turn with the racket up high, make a circle, finish over the shoulder. That was it. And sometimes people would deviate, and I would deviate from that too. I was passionate about tennis, and I would go on YouTube and I would watch Kyrgios, right? And I thought, or Sampras, right? And I would see like how Sampras would bring the elbow up, and I thought that's a big thing, and I would just experiment. But at the end of the day, what the coach would bring you to the basics and tell you, hey, like you can do that, but the look needs to stay simple, because as you're gonna get up in level, the ball is only gonna come faster.
Now here's the story, a little chit chat. Obviously, a lot of downtime at a tournament. So Andy Fitzell spent so many years with us. He chats Denis Shapovalov. Well, Denis Shapovalov spent 10 years at the Richmond Hill Country Club, and Richard Hernandez was the director. And he hired Tessa, and she certainly had a language barrier. I mean, from Russia, she was in Israel, then she came to Canada, but was in Israel very long. But the expression bought in, she never bought into the elbow being raised. And, it's not a continental grip necessarily. It's getting, like Vic Braden used to always say, it's not the grip, it's the angle of the racket face. You can have a continental grip. You just have to, adjust your wrist, make sure your elbow's raised, like a Johnny McEnroe from 100 years ago. But yeah, you can always say a couple things that just stop people for years and years, like Jose Garris on the forehand volley. It's almost a continental grip. Braden, no such thing as a perfect grip, just a grip with the least amount of adjustment. But, around the world, people on a ball above the level net are still, telling kids to lead in with the bottom edge of the racket. But I like, what you said, fundamental range of correction. Are you in the ballpark? But anyway, Andy's conversation with Shapovalov, he told me that, he wasn't too excited about talking about his childhood at Richmond Hill, but he was positive when he heard the name Miran Man, because I really like Miran. I mean, I don't think Dennis is going to be listening to this podcast, but, that's somebody that he could go meet with, because he could get back on track. It's like Jimmy Arias said, he's one of the more honest commentators. He goes, I like how Shapovalov comes to the net, but he doesn't know what to do when he gets there. This racket face is so open. It's interesting, on our podcast, we're at 312 now. You mentioned Tsitsipas. He was taught out of Braden's book. With your dad, was there a Western influence? I mean, you said you had no. I can tell you a story. When I went to, was there an influence from the West? When I went to Russia to study tennis, they made a mistake at the border. They took my CompuTennis apart right in front of me and put it back together, this computer for charting. But they didn't notice I came in the country with all these tennis magazines. I was having, back in the day, wherever I was in Europe, I would have my mail sent to me weekly. So I ended up in Moscow, but I had, back in the day, I would have quite a few tennis magazines and tennis newspapers. But what type of outside influence for outside of Russia did the coaches have that from your dad's generation?
I mean, I think it's mainly Eastern European influence. How would you define Western influence on a tennis? That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, no, in our country we'd say the Iron Curtain, but not the Eastern Bloc. But yeah, obviously there was East Germany and there was West Germany. That would be one way to define it. But the schools, the countries, I should say, that were not part of the Soviet regime. We talked about that.
In terms of tennis?
Yeah, we talked.
Tennis philosophy.
Right, we talked about that briefly with the Czechs, with Drobny winning Wimbledon in '54, and then Jan Kodesh in '73, and tennis wasn't an Olympic sport. The Russians, the Soviets, they suppressed tennis at one point. But yeah, it was just was there an outside influence? What was the source of information?
I think just mainly learning from the coaches, that kind of learning through the coaching tree. That's I think how my dad did it. I mean, you definitely watch and observe, and my dad always liked to watch Spanish guys and liked to watch how they work. And I think that would be one of the influence that I think, we did sometimes our trainings could be just you hit side to side and you slide on clay for an hour and he would just hand hit balls. So I think there was some kind of a Spanish level of Pato Alvarez just kind of run and slide and just accelerate the ball and just fight for everything. I think that's something that we did, just kind of lung buster stuff and just building that endurance. Because I also struggled with that too. I couldn't. It was not an easy thing for me to engage in long points and fight and grind. So I think he intentionally did that. And plus the clay courts in Russia, most of the summer tournaments he would play on clay. Outside of that, I mean, definitely I think from America came the low toss part. My dad thought was really low too. He used to hit a ball big on the serve. He's injured now, unfortunately, but getting that ball toss low and up in front and just spending time throwing. My granddad would take me out on a lake and we would just throw rocks. We would throw rackets on the field sometimes too. I think that could be a Western influence. But a lot of stuff I also don't remember because I was little. So that's just something that comes to my mind.
No, the throwing now, we bring this up where World War II, the Americans were throwing grenades very accurately like it was a baseball. And the Germans were putting the grenades on an 8-inch rod. I think, with like the number of hours that, say, Dave has taught, you learn so much. If you're paying attention, we'll say, well, somebody's taught 20 years, but they've been doing the same thing. They really only have 1 year experience, but they're always tweaking and thinking, reflecting, how can I do things better? But you learn from yourself, you learn from your students, you learn from your fellow coaches, and then if you're observant. But I think another thing too, just like a player, how many balls do you hit? How many hours have you put in? And the same thing with coaching. I think too many coaches, especially here in the U.S., they become figureheads. They're not really out there in the trenches. They have the title and they're farming the work out. But if you're actually, we say in the factory, you're working the assembly line, you're digging the ditches, you're gonna, it's like the carpenter who can really pound nails. Architect, he may know how the building needs to be built, but he hasn't built the building. Dave Anderson, you're up.
Well, I mean, Egor, when you were talking about Western influence, the surfaces, going back to how you grew up and the diversity and the type of court you had to play on, do you attribute that, people that haven't got to see you play? I mean, if I had to pick one part of your game, I mean, that just really stands out to me, it's your return of serve. And I think it's a combination of technique and mentality. Why don't you talk about your thoughts on the return of serve? Give everybody a little advice, and why do you think you have such a great return?
I think that the indoor court I grew up didn't have any space, so I had to take the ball early and simplify my swing, really. And also, I think kind of an interesting story. Looking back, I think why we started arguing with my dad, and we kind of didn't really have like a good direction. I didn't know I was also having astigmatism when I was not seeing the ball that well on the indoor court. So until age of 14, I wasn't wearing contacts, and I had to play kind of without seeing the ball properly. And in the indoor, super fast indoor, you have maybe like 2 meters to the side and not so much space back. So and the ball's coming really fast at you. So you just have to take the ball early and try to survive in that point. I mean, I think that's how it works for me. Carpet or hardwood, you just have to turn really quickly and move up to the ball because there's no other way. Like now I can experiment and I can, play with different ways. I can step back and I can maybe step up forward. But down there, I didn't have an option. So in order to start the point, I just have to take the ball early and step into it aggressively. And in doubles, I mean, I would tell every junior in America, if it's a second serve, return and come into the net. Warm and hold the net. I feel like for a lot of people, return and volley works better than serve and volley because they don't practice serve and volley enough. So to me, like that's how I developed it. I would just have to be there very early, and I would just have to simplify my stroke and just step into it.
Igor, did you have a chance to hit against a wall a lot when you were a kid?
Oh, that was my babysitter. I mean, my dad would teach, and he would teach on court 3 down at Spartak Kaliningrad Stadium, and there was a wall, and he was just like, here you go, 3 balls, rackets, just go out and hang out. And speaking of the wall, I was talking to my grandma over FaceTime 2 weeks ago, and, she was kind of complaining and reprimanding my younger brother. She was like, I remember you hitting against the wall, and here, there is no tennis without hitting the ball against the wall. Like, how can you play tennis if you don't hit against the wall? That was her exact word. And she's not an athlete person, but she understands that if you're a tennis player, you just have to do it. So,
No,
and
yeah.
when I was here, backboard, the portable backboard that forces you to swing up, I spend a lot of time on that too. So, absolutely.
I've been working on a book, and certainly the wall. That your comment right now, the wall was my babysitter. We talk about golden nuggets. That's a golden nugget. Then your grandmother's spot on. Jimmy Connors, hitting off a wall, off a wooden surface. His father was a toll bridge operator. Mother, grandmother were tennis teachers. East St. Louis, it wasn't like he was a rich kid. And there was times where he'd just go to the armory and that was his day. He was, for tennis, he's just hitting against the wall. It's like the ball goes to the net and comes back. And people are going to have better footwork. With, Pancho Seguro, you want to find the court with the poorest lighting. You want to find the worst court and the slick court. Yeah, so when you see people playing on wood, I spent a lot of time with Dave back in the day in East Texas. And I had coaches that were at these clubs, Holly Tree, Willowbrook, not tennis and swim, but Timber Creek. But I had access to this Catholic school. Had a track, but it had 2 gyms that I could use anytime in the summer. And I had one of those heavy duty portable nets, and we had kids playing on wood. You just, to hear things on this podcast, well, you got a kid who's playing, you may not even be a tennis player like a Richard Williams, but you find out that Monica Selish's father served 2 baskets of balls every day from the service line to her. It's really sad that people are so far back, and it's sad that people aren't challenging the person on the other side of the net by coming in. I mean, there's a lot of good things that have gone away. And, like Andy Roddick, he's the voice of American tennis. Now he's gone from the podcast to, front and center during the Wimbledon fortnight. He worked with Jimmy Connors, and he said, yeah, artificial hips. He still hits the backboard to this day, 72 years old. But Roddick said he just didn't miss. And everything was just, he just put himself in one corner and just hit. But I've always said that the appreciation of history, like in the sport I grew up in, no one would say, well, Bobby Orr couldn't play in today's game. Granted, kids get on YouTube and the ball, with the technology, the ball was going slower, but the skill level was so high. But yeah, that's a golden nugget. The wall was my babysitter. Now let's wind it down, guys. This is great. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead. Another question.
Well, I mean, not really a question. It's just, Egor, why don't you just tell the listeners how old you are?
I just turned 24.
Whoa.
Yeah, you're 24 years old, and I think I met you when you were 22, maybe 23. But tennis benefits from having young pros, or just pros in general, like you in it. I think that the humility that you show by being on a quest for learning, for knowledge, for hungry for information, and just the work ethic and the willingness to do anything. I think it's a rare quality, and it's very admirable. And I think that's where, you're very humble. You can really hit a tennis ball. You could have played at the marquee schools that we've talked about, and the way that you've approached this journey so far in your life, I mean, it's just a story that should inspire every parent and every player out there, because you've taken the road less traveled, and you've done it on really good terms with your character and your integrity and everything. And it's just cool. It's a very cool thing to see. And, I think you've been a incredible asset to have here at our academy. And I know you did a great job working out in McKinney with Coach Mark. And I think you've got an incredible future ahead of you in the sport of tennis, and you're going to impact a lot of lives. So well done.
No, Dave, thanks for saying that for our listeners. This has been a great treat. I tell parents all the time that when your kid gets to be 28, they'll be where you were when you were 18.
Yeah.
It's like Jim Lair says, or the late Jim Lair, the late great Jim Lair. Yeah, the pillows have to be softer and the marshmallows have to be sweeter. With and Bobby Knight, the late Bobby Knight, he would be negative towards himself. He said, "No, the parents of yesteryear, the parents of and where they had more children too. I mean, smaller families. There's so many factors. Last thing for me, tell us about working at Brookhaven. We don't really, my fault. Don't say enough things about when Coach Anderson comes on. We're like what he does. If it's a first time listener, people wouldn't really know that much about Brookhaven if maybe they're overseas or what have you. But obviously a big operation out in Dallas, lots of success. What are your thoughts on working there?
I think it's great to have all the coaches lined up on a similar system. I think it helps kids to understand and have that trust that, knowing that every coach there will deliver the right message and there's going to be just less guesswork and less opinion and more fact-based instruction. So to me, that was a lot easier to adapt to, and I didn't have to fight the things that you guys fought over the last, 30 years and more. So to me, that's great. There's always, it's just incredibly huge operation, and it's like a tennis town. It's beautiful. It's renovated. You have covered courts. You have climate courts. You have outdoor hard. You have green clay. So it's great. There is always, things that we can get better on, and we work on towards improving what we can. But it's just incredible place, and we try to do the best that we can to foster the right habits and the right character and the right fundamentals in the kids so that they can succeed in tennis and beyond that.
No, that's great. And when you get together, or now you can communicate, so it's much easier now with your dad to send emails and whatever, FaceTime. What does your dad think of the GreatBase and the rationale behind it?
He was quite kind of surprised, and because I was in Turkey and there was a court nearby, and I helped out with my younger brother, and I would just all the way throughout our vacation, we would go and I would teach him out. I literally spent an hour and a half with him doing well-debunked form body balance position, and suddenly his volley cleaned up. Still, volley in most places is an afterthought. There's probably 2 or 3 academies in whole Dallas area that work on the volley. In Russia, I don't think it's even any. So, when he saw my brother dialing in on that, and he's not like amazing at learning and mirroring the things, but he locked in and he did well, and he started seeing things. My dad started seeing things. I took my brother's ready position, just centering it out, and all that inverted racket face just started to disappear. So things that my brother tried to explain to my dad tried to explain to my brother ended up working a little bit better because just a different way of presenting information. And I think he doesn't understand it yet, but I explain it to everything. But I think he seems that he sees all the stuff I send him, and he's very, very appreciative of that. I think he learns from it a good bit too.
Oh, that's great. Actually, next week I'm going to be in Toronto at a club that I've worked at for 33 years. They've had, they're on their really third generation of a director. And the owner, he refers to what we do as the American method. And obviously GreatBase is, very, very small. We have a growing network, but it's certainly not the American method. And even our pillars, I have these portraits above me, but like Vandermeer is from South Africa, or Burwash from Canada, Hopman from Australia. It's international. And our course, Tennis Intelligence Apply, we mentioned over 100 coaches. But no, this has been very refreshing. It was great to meet you when we were at Baylor University. I need to get back out to Dallas and check out the renovations. But I've heard many great things about you, and it's certainly come through loud and clear on this podcast tonight. But guys, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Especially, I know it's the summertime, 120 degrees, and you're putting in really long hours. But these podcasts, I think everybody should just try to do what they can to improve the game, the growth and welfare of tennis. And that's what we're trying to do through the free educational content. And this format, the podcast, is part of that. But Dave, Egor, listeners, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Episode 312 in the books. We'll have to do this again.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Adios. Adios, amigos.